Chapter 15, Part 2, The Making of Radical Reconstruction. Andrew Johnson, Lincoln's successor to the presidency, was initially responsible for Reconstruction. Johnson rose from poverty to a political career in state politics in Tennessee, which he represented in the U.S. Congress and where he was governor. Johnson championed Tennessee's small white farmers and made enemies of the state's large slave-owning planters. Staunchly Unionist, he was the only senator from a seceding state to remain in the Senate, and he served as Tennessee's military governor during the war. His vice presidency, Republicans hoped, would gain support for the party in the South, but Johnson lacked Lincoln's political acumen and ability to compromise. Johnson also defended states' rights. He argued that since secession was illegal, Southern states never actually left the Union or gave up their right to govern their own affairs. And Johnson, while supporting emancipation, was deeply racist and did not believe blacks had a role to play in Reconstruction. In May 1865, Johnson started to release proclamations that inaugurated a period that historians call presidential Reconstruction. This was from 1865 to 1867. Johnson offered pardons which restored political and property rights, except for slaves, to all white Southerners who took an oath of allegiance, excluding only Confederate leaders and wealthy planters whose pre-war property was worth more than $20,000. But Johnson soon pardoned those exempted by this rule. He also appointed provisional governors and ordered them to call state conventions, elected by whites only, to establish loyal Southern state governments. These new state governments were required only to abolish slavery, repudiate secession, and refuse to pay Confederate debts. While many people in the North at first supported Johnson's plan, Southern whites mostly returned prominent Confederates and old elites to power, and violence against the freed people and Northerners in the South generated opposition to Johnson's policies. New state laws in the South, regulating the lives of former slaves, called the Black Codes, caused the most opposition to Johnson's Reconstruction policy. While these laws gave blacks the right to legally marry, own property, and access the courts in some ways, they denied them the rights to testify against whites, serve on juries or state militias, or vote. They also allowed authorities to arrest and hire out to white landowners any blacks who refused to sign annual labor contracts, a measure to force the former slaves to return to the plantations. Some states prohibited blacks from buying land and allowed judges to assign black children to work for their former owners without parental consent. These codes, an effort to reinstitute conditions of slavery, violated the free labor principles of the Republican North and caused many in the North to believe that Johnson's policy was encouraging white Southerners to restore their pre-war way of life. In December of 1865, Johnson declared that the establishment of loyal governments in all Southern states had reunited the nation, but radical Republicans in Congress, who coalesced around opposition to Johnson's policies, called for new state governments that would exclude rebels from power and guarantee the vote to blacks. The radicals believed that the Union victory presented an opportunity to guarantee equal rights for all, despite race. They welcomed the expanded powers of the federal government and thought federalism and states' rights could not prevent national efforts to secure equal rights. Charles Sumner, a Massachusetts senator, and Thaddeus Stevens, representing Pennsylvania in the House, were the most prominent radicals. Stevens in particular wanted to confiscate the lands of disloyal planters and distribute them to former slaves and northern migrants. But most members of Congress respected property rights too much to embrace Stevens' land reform proposals. Although Republicans had an overwhelming majority in Congress, the South actually had no representatives, the party was divided. Radicals were only a minority. Most Republicans were moderates who thought Johnson's plan needed only improvement. The moderates believed that Southern and Northern whites would never accept black suffrage. Moderates and radicals refused to seat Southerners elected to Congress, but the moderates made sure that Southern governments remained. Moderates extended the life of the Freedmen's Bureau and proposed a civil rights bill, which defined all persons born in the United States as citizens and spelled out rights they enjoyed, regardless of race. Equality before the law was central to the bill, making it impossible for free states to have laws, like the Black Codes, that discriminated against blacks. Free labor values also informed the bill, which prohibited laws denying citizens rights to make contracts, bring lawsuits, or enjoy protection of person and property. The bill said nothing of black suffrage. Johnson, who shocked the Congress by vetoing both bills, claimed he was defending states' rights and said blacks did not deserve citizenship. Johnson's vetoes alienated many in the Republican Party, and in April of 1866, the Civil Rights Bill became the first major law in U.S. history to be passed over a presidential veto. Congress soon created its own Reconstruction plan. Its Civil Rights Bill became the basis of the 14th Amendment, which placed in the Constitution the principle of citizenship for all persons born in the United States and empowered the federal government to protect the rights of all Americans. The amendment banned the states from abridging the privileges and immunities of citizens or denying them the equal protection of the law. This language allowed future Congresses and federal courts to give meaning to this promise of legal equality. As a compromise between moderate and radical Republicans, the amendment did not grant black suffrage, but it did stipulate that any state that denied voting rights to any group of men would face a reduction in its representation in Congress. Emancipation also threatened the South's political power because now all blacks, not just 3/5, would be counted in determining a state's representation in Congress. The 14th Amendment offered the white South's political leadership a choice: allow black men to vote and keep their representation, or limit the vote to whites and lose power in Congress. The 14th Amendment created great conflict between the parties. Not one Democrat voted for it, and only 4 Republicans opposed it. While radicals deplored that it did not give blacks the vote, the amendment made legal equality regardless of race a basic right of all American citizens. In 1866, elections revolved around the 14th Amendment. Johnson urged voters to elect men to Congress who supported his policies and claimed that radicals were plotting to assassinate him. This, along with riots in southern cities targeting blacks, undermined support for Johnson's allies, and Republican opponents emerged victorious in the elections. But every southern state except Tennessee refused to ratify the 14th Amendment. Johnson and the white South's resistance pushed moderate Republicans into the radical camp, and in March of 1867, Congress passed the Reconstruction Act, which temporarily divided the South into 5 military districts and called for the establishment of new state governments in which black men could vote. This inaugurated the period of radical Reconstruction that lasted until 1877. Congress simultaneously approved a measure prohibiting the president from removing certain office holders, including members of the cabinet, without the Senate's consent. Johnson believed this unconstitutionally limited his authority, and when he removed Secretary of War Edwin M. Stanton, a radical ally, the House approved articles of impeachment, sending charges against Johnson to the Senate, which was to decide his fate. This was the first time a president had faced trial in the Senate for high crimes and misdemeanors. Not all Republicans supported impeachment, and Johnson indicated he would halt his interference with Congress's Reconstruction policy. He barely escaped impeachment. Republicans nominated Ulysses S. Grant for president to run against Horatio Seymour, the Democratic candidate and former New York governor, in the 1868 election. Reconstruction was the issue of the elections. Republicans tarred Democrats with secession and treason, a tactic called waving the bloody shirt, while Democrats denounced Reconstruction as unconstitutional and made racist appeals, arguing that black suffrage violated American political traditions. Grant won the presidential contest by a slim margin. Republicans responded in February of 1869 by adopting the third and final Reconstruction Amendment, the 15th, which barred federal and state governments from denying the right to vote to any citizen based on race. Denounced by Democrats, the amendment was ratified in 1870. The 15th Amendment enabled states to make suffrage restrictions not based on race, such as literacy tests, property requirements, and poll taxes, and did not give the vote to women, but it represented the culmination of abolitionism. Reconstruction laws and amendments reflected the power of the new national state and the idea that citizens should enjoy legal equality. They were, in the words of one Republican, a great constitutional revolution that transformed the federal system and the language of American freedom. Before the Civil War, citizenship had been bounded by race, but Reconstruction laws rejected the notion that citizenship was reserved only for whites. Their guarantees of legal equality affected discriminatory laws in all states, North and South. The new amendments also changed the relationship between states and the federal government. The Bill of Rights had assumed that the central government threatened liberties, but the Reconstruction Amendments assumed that only the national government could protect individual rights. They made the Constitution an instrument by which vulnerable minorities could make claims for freedom and against government misconduct at all levels. Many important 20th century Supreme Court decisions were based on the 14th Amendment, such as the 1954 Brown ruling outlawing school segregation. Reconstruction recast the boundaries of American freedom. Exclusions that limited citizenship and its privileges to white men had long defined American democratic practice. Even Republicans committed to universal rights did not want to extend rights to all the races. Some Republicans, like Frederick Douglass and Charles Sumner, wanted to end discrimination against Asians in the nation's immigration law. When in 1870 Sumner tried to strike the word white from naturalization requirements, Western states' senators made Africans eligible for naturalization but barred Asians from becoming naturalized citizens. Up into the 20th century, Asian immigrants could not become citizens, while their American-born children became citizens automatically. Women's rights advocates discovered the limits of Reconstruction-era egalitarianism. They saw the expansion of federal power and rights as a moment to advance women's equality, but their demands, especially the demand for women's suffrage, found little support among male politicians, even among radical Republicans who considered Reconstruction an opportunity to benefit black men. The 14th and 15th Amendments specifically benefited men, not women, and caused a division within the feminist camp and between feminists and radical Republicans. Some, like Elizabeth Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, opposed the 15th Amendment because it did not enfranchise women. They tried to sever women's rights from abolitionism and even appealed to racism to demand rights for women. Other abolitionist feminists, such as Abby Kelly and Lucy Stone, argued that the Reconstruction Amendments, while limited, were advances toward universal suffrage and should be supported. These two sides split into two groups: the National Women's Suffrage Association, NWSA, representing the former, and the American Women's Suffrage Association, the AWSA, representing the latter. Despite drawing the boundaries of freedom at gender, Reconstruction marked the only society in the world in which emancipation had been followed by the extension of citizenship rights to former slaves.